Welcome everyone to CG's seminar number 265, and we must be well into the getting close to 150 in the webinar format. It's good to have you back and to discuss again students and global citizenship topic of a week ago. And we have with us today Shi Tao and Stephanie Mitsuko Kukita, both from East Asia, China and Japan. We have a lot of East Asian presentation in our webinar program and a lot of discussion of higher education in East Asia. So it's really good to be able to continue that. And we hope that lots of people from the region will be tuning in today as well. I'll introduce our speakers in a moment. Let me take you all through the housekeeping aspects of the opening of the webinar. Remember that the webinar is being recorded. It'll be posted online on the CGHE website within 48 hours or so, and it winds up on YouTube where you can see it for the rest of history. As long as YouTube exists, you'll be able to see this webinar. And the transcript of the chat function conversation will also be posted on our website pretty soon. Now, during the webinar, it's a really good idea to keep yourself muted because sometimes we pick up extraneous noise from you if you're not muted, and that can disrupt things quite considerably. Of course, when you are asked to speak during the Q&A session, unmute yourself at that point. No need to have your video on either really during the main webinar, but again, when you're coming into the discussion, it's great if you can turn on your video. So we recommend using the speaker view command in the top right-hand corner there, so you can more clearly see who is talking during the webinar. Now, to ask a question, and this is really an important part of our webinars, write your question out and post it in the chat, either for me or for everyone. And also, if you want to make a statement that's not a question, you're most welcome to do so. If your statement is on the topic of the webinar, again, you need to indicate in the chat that you intend to speak. And I'll select the participants in the Q&A on the basis of what's coming forward in the chat, and we'll usually give our speakers a chance to respond to what's being said or what's being asked. I'll give you a warning in the chat to say that we're going to bring you in. When you're asked to speak during the Q&A, as I said, you unmute yourself and you turn on your video if you can, and you, at the commencement of speaking, you state your name and where you are from. And let me say that no one ever remembers to do that. After hearing me say it and then having a half an hour of presentation, people forget the need to say who they are and where they're from. But try and remember. It's nice if we know who you are. Now I'll stop the housekeeping at this stage and introduce our speakers. Shi Tao, who's going to be our first speaker, is one of Professor Douglas Bourne's PhD students at the Institute of Education at the University College London. And let me pay tribute to Doug Bourne because he has helped organise two very successful webinars around the topic of students and global citizenship. She's got a background in working for universities and study abroad agents across the UK and China. She studies how experience in British universities influences Chinese students' perceptions of being global citizens. Her research areas include global citizenship in higher education, international mobility, and global skills. She's currently living in London. Stephanie Mitsuko Kukita is a lecturer at Soka University in Tokyo in Japan, and she obtained her PhD in curriculum, pedagogy and assessment from the Institute of Education, University College London. Her research interests include global citizenship, especially within the realm of youth, identity, and civic engagement. Stephanie and Shi, we really look forward to what you've got to say. And at this point, let me hand over to Shi.
Yeah, thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see my screen now?
Yes, we can see that. Thanks, Shi.
Okay, hear me okay?
Yes,
Great.
we can.
Yeah, so I just okay, welcome everybody. My name is Shi Tao. I would love to present my PhD dissertation today and share the research result with everybody here. First of all, I would like to say Happy Chinese New Year to everybody. Today is the first day of the Year of Tiger in Chinese Canada. So I feel very happy to share Chinese students' study experience in the UK with everybody. So my research title is Becoming a Global Citizen Through Study Abroad. It is a longitudinal study of Chinese postgraduate students' experience in the UK. Okay, so first of all, let's look at my research context. Just as this interesting picture showing, under the impact of globalization, we can see within China, there are many international influence inside China. Also, China's influence is everywhere in the whole globe. Under this trend of globalization, there's a dramatically increasing number of Chinese international students who study abroad, mainly in Western countries, such as USA, the UK, Australia, and Canada. At the same time, China's development into a knowledge economy is calling for well-educated human resource with global outlook and skills to engage globally. So under this research background, my research aims to present various perspectives of global citizenship and the experience of becoming global citizens from Chinese students, their unique approach, which are distinct from the prevailing Western sense of global citizenship, and also different from previous literatures on global citizenship and study abroad. So my research aims to understand the relationship between global citizenship development and international mobility, with focus on Chinese postgraduate students, their lived experience in the UK. My research is related to three interrelated areas: global citizenship, international mobility, and Chinese students. The main research question is how study abroad experience influence Chinese students, their perception of being global citizens. Under these main questions, there's 4 sub-questions which are related to Chinese students' experience. The first one is about Chinese students, their motivation to study abroad, and this motivation in relation to their becoming global citizens intention. And the second question, it is about what specific experience triggered and facilitated students study abroad so that they become global citizens. And the third question is, what are the changes of students, their perception of global citizenship through the whole process of their study abroad? And the fourth one is, what are students, their perceived, their global skilled change during study abroad? So firstly, as my research is about Chinese students, they are becoming global citizens. So let's look at what is a global citizen. Although there are many literatures from different perspectives to interpret what is a global citizen, my research drew on the evidence from literature review and my own research interest, so that the global citizen as somebody with values and attitudes, plus adequate skills to live in a globalized world. Based on this, my research provides a value-based and a skill-based approach to interpret Chinese students becoming global citizens. So I investigate 2 main things: students, their changing perceptions of being global citizen, and the second is the improvement and global skills. So in terms of students, their changing perception and values, My research adopts 3 different approaches to interpret global citizenship. I think previously in our webinar last week, my colleague, she also mentioned this 3 approach. So the first one is the neoliberal approach. Under this approach, students are perceived as global workers. So a global citizen is somebody who succeeds in capitalist society and could compete in employment market. And the second approach is a cosmopolitan approach, which are mainly advocated by international organizations such as Oxfam and UNESCO. Within this approach, students are seen as sharing a common humanity and have a sense of belonging to the whole human community, and also emphasize the respect of diversity rights, responsibilities, global morals, and global ethics. So the third approach, it is a critical one. So it's emphasize understanding the complexity of global power, and also students their own self-reflection and participation for social justice. My supervisor, Douglas Boone, just published a book. It emphasizes the participation for social justice. So my research also, a big part of my research also cover the critical approach of global citizenship. So in terms of students, their global skills, my research questions are designed to assess, evaluate students' different sets of skills. And it is based on the framework from Professor Douglas Boone's book, Understanding Global Skills for 21st Century Professions. Within this framework, there's 7 different sets of skills in relation to students, their ability to aware their identity, their values, their knowledge of globalization, digital literacy, their critical reflection ability, their collaboration and engagement ability, and participation in social justice. Under these two framework of the deep 3 approach to global citizenship and global skills, my research adopt a longitudinal research design, which starts from the 2018 September and also end in July 2020. My research began in a questionnaire of 115 students from 3 universities: UCL, my own university, and the University of London and the University of Bath. So based on this question, based on the initial questionnaire, I selected 19 students of mixed major and different universities. They participated in 3 sets of interviews at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of their postgraduate program. At the end of their program, I also conducted a final questionnaire, and just to check students their confirmation with the interview result. So my findings is I have 4 areas of findings which is related to my 4 research questions. So firstly, students' motivation of becoming global citizens. As we can see with this diagram, Chinese students number is increasing every year, almost 150,000 in the UK. So those Chinese students, according to my research, not everyone is familiar with the term global citizenship, but all the students have some understanding and some other term related to global citizenship, such as global outlook, global competency. The majority of Chinese students, they should strong interest in global citizenship, and they view it as a personal trait, a type of worldview, layer of identity, or some capabilities they think they already have or would like to develop. Chinese students' motivation of study abroad and becoming global citizen are generated by their previous international experience, their personal interest in Western culture, and career ambition, also their family background. In my second finding, I developed a comprehensive framework to explain the process or the mechanism of how Chinese students, they become global citizens. So as the start of the diagram, I identified 6 types of experience, which triggers students' transformative learning experience. So these 6 types of experience are closely related to 5 stages of the Maslow's transformative learning theory. So this explains how the study abroad experience could make Chinese students to go through the transformative journey to become global citizens. And the outcome of the transformative journey is students, they changed their perception of global citizenship, also improved global skills. The outcome in regarding 3 different areas, which related to the 3 different approach I mentioned before. The ability to work in a global economy, engaging people from different cultures, and making sense of the globalized world, and also for social justice. So from the framework, we can say that students, their own agency and effort and self-reflection and social participation are the key driving force of their transformative learning to become global citizens. The third area of finding is that students changing perception of being global citizens. Students changed sense of self in the world, global outlook, attitude, and understanding of globalization. The outcome of students' change of perception have had a profound impact of their future career plan, lifestyle, identity, and social responsibility after they went back to China. And another very interesting fact is most Western students who study abroad, according to previous literature, they realize the social justice against the post-colonizing capitalism, inequality, and power imbalance. However, Chinese students showed different outcome. Chinese students' outcome emphasize the value of openness and inclusiveness as the global attitude. And also, their attitudes changed in regarding to the social participation through protesting and freedom of speech. My final area of finding, it is about students' development of global skills. I identified 6 catalogs of global skills which students developed during their experience, which includes intercultural communication, critical thinking, personal growth, academic skills, and social engagement and digital literacy. However, due to these students, they're different, the quality of their experience, some of their skill development is limited by their lack of opportunity, capability, and interest in expanding social network and making efforts in active participation. So finally, my research concludes as a study abroad experience can provide Chinese students, also other international students, with a platform to foster global citizenship. Through this platform, students are provided with opportunity to understand global citizenship, globalization in different perspectives and improve different sets of global skills. Chinese, also through this platform, Chinese students become a type of Chinese global citizens with not only enhanced employability, but also the cosmopolitan value of inclusiveness and the power of critical reflection and themselves in the globalized world. And the most important thing is the transformation, Chinese student transformation into global citizens is achieved by their own effort of proactive participation in various forms of academic and social activities. Those activities are provided by the universities and the local communities in the UK. Okay, that's my research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shi. I think we'll pass straight to Stephanie and Mitsuko at this point. Mitsuko, come in, please.
Okay, great. I will. Oh, it says I cannot share my screen.
Trying
She will
to.
need to stop sharing, I think. Yeah.
Oh, there. Okay. Great.
Here it comes.
Can you see?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Stephanie Kukita, and I'm currently a lecturer at Soka University in Tokyo, Japan. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share my research. I'm actually going to be sharing today is actually a part of a study that I conducted for my doctoral research at UCL, also under Professor Douglas Bourne. Okay. Okay, so first, I would like to briefly give you some background as to why I decided to look into young people's life experiences for my study. So first, much of the literature around global citizenship education, GCE, has been conceptual as to what global citizenship should entail, or has focused on assessing, for example, the knowledge, skills, and attitudes associated with what key stakeholders define as qualities pertaining to global citizenship. But as Bourne and Brown note, there's little focus on research about the processes of learning and engagement from young people's perspectives, since most of the research has been written on what it should mean for young people to engage with global issues. So I felt the importance of focusing my study to further examine young people's perspectives on their processes of learning and also engagement to better understand how we can implement GCE. So in order to look into this, Yuri Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model became a base framework and has influenced the direction in which I examined young people's perspectives and engagement with the world. And Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model suggests that a single condition does not always lead to similar developmental outcomes, and also suggests the importance of considering individuals' contextual backgrounds and also circumstances to better understand their developmental trajectories. So he also noted that interactions an individual has with various systems, from the microsystem to the chronosystem, could impact how they develop. So for example, the microsystem is the most direct and immediate environment of influence for an individual, whereas the macrosystem is a system that indirectly influences one's ideological and also cultural perceptions. And then also, for example, the chronosystem includes the influences of time. So Bronfenbrenner referred to the interactions an individual has with others as proximal processes, and the degree to which the interactions have an impact on individuals' development is said to depend on the disposition, also resources and demand of the person, and also the context in which the interactions occur, and also the time in which the interaction occurs. So these are the properties of the bioecological model, and are referred to as the process, person, context, time, PPCT model. And so for the study, I tried to identify how young people's life experiences or interactions based on the PPCT model could influence their engagement with local and global issues. So what do I mean by engagement? Defining engagement is largely a contested area, but for my study, I defined it to broadly include UNESCO's 3 conceptual dimensions of global citizenship education. That is the cognitive, the social emotional, and the behavioral. So the purpose of my study was not to define what each of these should encompass, but rather use these dimensions more broadly as a way to look into how young people engage. So engage not only through commonly observed ways of engagement, for example, participating in civic activities, but to also look at how they view the world as part of engagement. So for my study, I refer to the cognitive dimension more broadly to include the knowledge one has regarding local and or global issues. And I refer to the social emotional dimension to include the values and attitudes one has regarding their local and or global community. And I refer to the behavioral dimension to include the actions one takes within their local and or global community. And so for the portion of the study that I'll be sharing with you today, I focused on examining the following. So what are some of the process, person, context, time, PPCT elements that influence one's social, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral engagement with issues happening at their local, national, and or global spheres? So the study that I conducted was in 2 phases. So phase 1 consisted of one-on-one interviews with 22 students from 2 private high schools in Tokyo, 2 public high schools in adjacent prefectures. And the interviews were conducted between August 2014 and February 2015. And phase 2 consisted of interviews with 6 of the students who were interviewed in phase 1, 4 years later between May and September 2018 to decipher whether the time, a vital element in Bronfenbrenner's model, played a role in how their engagements have stayed the same or have changed. So interviews in phase 1 were more structured and mainly asked students about their interest in societal issues and volunteer activities, while interviews in phase 2 were less structured and provided updates on what they were engaged in and reflected how they may have changed since they were last interviewed. So due to the limited time of the presentation, I will focus on providing with the findings from the interviews with the 6 students who were interviewed both in phase 1 and phase 2. So first, I would like to share Shota and Takumi's story. So Shota and Takumi were students from the same private high school, and they were both actively engaged in various volunteer activities when interviewed in phase 1 and phase 2. So during phase 2, they were both taking part in building a library for an orphanage in Cambodia. But what was interesting from the interviews in phase 2 was that although they were both engaged in the same activity, the root of their inspiration to participate was different. So for Shota, his involvement in Cambodia stemmed from his interest in resolving global poverty issues that were inspired by his English teacher back in high school. And in the interview, Shota said, "I learned a lot from the class and was influenced a lot from it. And above all, the teacher had an understanding about poverty issues. And we learned a lot about it using English, and I became really interested in poverty issues." And that had led him and his peers, also including Takumi, to establish a student organization right before they entered college. And it was when Shota and Takumi visited Cambodia during their first year in college, they met a teacher at an orphanage around their age, who then inspired them to take part in building a library for an orphanage. So meanwhile, Takumi noted in the interview how his interest in poverty issues were inspired from his own experiences of encountering financial difficulties. So in the interview, Takumi mentioned about his conversation with a teacher at the orphanage, and he happened to see the teacher reading one of his favorite books. So he asked the teacher if he reads a lot of books, but the teacher responded that he actually didn't have the opportunity to read books when he was young due to financial issues. And the teacher told Takumi that he wants his students to be able to read and wants an environment that would allow them to do so. So regarding this conversation that Takumi had, he shared, "I was deeply impressed with his words, especially since if I also did not have the money or such assistance to receive scholarship did not exist, I would not have been able to receive an education. I think education is something that can be open for everyone." And how that person had the fervor to provide education for those in poverty, I just felt the same way, and we were like, let's do something together. So in the case of Shota and Takumi, although they ended up engaging in the same activity, the factors that had encouraged them to participate in the activity were different. So next, I would like to share Ryota's story. So similar to Shota and Takumi, Ryota had been involved in various volunteer activities when he was interviewed in both phase 1 and also phase 2. But what was different, what was interesting was that in comparing Ryota with Shota and Takumi's interviews, although all three students expressed how they were taking part in activities because they wanted to help others, Ryota more frequently commented how his volunteer activities were a means for him to gain various experiences. So especially when interviewed as a college student, he stressed how he did not get into the school he desired, and in order to compensate for that, he had been trying to gain as much experience as possible through different means, including participating in volunteer activities. So Ryota's story in comparison to Shota and Takumi's stories show how young people could have different motives for their participation in various activities. So next, I would like to share Kazuki and Daichi's stories. So at the time of the first interview, in phase 1, Kazuki and Daichi had leadership roles in their school student government. And both of them shared how they participate in a variety of volunteer activities and events as part of their student government activities. However, interestingly, both of them, when interviewed 4 years later in phase 2, indicated that they were not involved in any volunteer activities. So Kazuki became a firefighter after he graduated from high school. Daichi got into his desired university and was a second-year college student in the Faculty of Pharmacy. Although both noted that they were no longer engaged in volunteer activities, the reasons for their disengagements were different. So for example, Kazuki commented how he had been busy with work, that he had not been able to participate in volunteer activities. Meanwhile, Daichi joined a social exchange club at his university. And when I asked if he was involved in any volunteer activities, Daichi responded, well, after getting into college, there were clubs that did volunteer activities, but rather than those, well, since I've experienced that in high school, I wanted to do as I pleased and do something fun. So although it's kind of difficult to kind of decipher from the interview what caused this change for Daichi, this demonstrates how perceptions towards engagement could change over time. And also both interviews with Kazuki and Daichi indicate how the frequency of participation in volunteer activities at one point in time cannot necessarily be an indicator of one's level of participation in another point in time. So finally, I would like to share Misaki's story. So unlike the other students interviewed, Misaki in both phases indicated due to her busy schedule, she had not been able to participate in any volunteer activities. She mentioned how the distance she needed to travel to volunteer and also the time it consumes to participate in activities have hindered her involvement. So nevertheless, Misaki's story is also important to highlight because although she may not necessarily be involved in what would be typically be categorized as volunteer activities, Misaki reflected how her perceptions have changed since high school, especially through having the opportunity to study abroad as part of her university program. And she shared, I think I have changed since high school. What has changed? I think I've widened my perspectives with regards to my career, as well as I think since my interests have also grown. I also think because I have been experiencing many things. When I was a high school student, I wasn't able to take action, although there are still many things that I cannot act upon. But in high school, I had many friends who were proactive and studied abroad or visited overseas for a week during summer break. But I wanted to, but could not make that happen. As a college student, I visited the United States, Vietnam, and Taiwan, and I thought, rather than not going and trying to think of things through imagination, it is better to just go and experience it. That way, as I have, I think one's perspectives can change and become wider. So although her visits were not for the purposes of engaging in volunteer activities, her visits allowed her to widen her perspectives and also views about the world. Okay, to summarize some of the key themes from the interviews were as follows. So first, Shota and Takumi's stories showed how there could be varying reasons or life experiences that encourage young people to participate in activities. And also Ryota's story showed how young people could have different motives in their engagement. Kazuki and Daichi's stories illustrated how there could be changes in the level of engagement over time. And lastly, Misaki's stories indicated how perceptual views of the world could change over time. So to conclude, the finding from this portion of the study showed that young people could engage in various activities in personalized and dynamic ways So personalized in that their views and ways of engagement are shaped by their life journeys. That is how they perceive the world, their interest in societal issues, and or their desires to participate in civic activities could be different depending on their life experiences. And their views and engagements are dynamic in that it could change depending on the context they are placed in and also their circumstances over time. So that's what is assumed as best practices for global citizenship education, GCE, may not be equally effective for all learners. And therefore, I think it is important to consider not only general cultural context, but also individual learner context when we implement GCE. So thank you very much.
And thank you, Stephanie. And let me encourage our listeners, our watchers, to come into the chat at this point and put forward their questions and statements there, so I can select you into the conversation. We already have a couple of people putting forward some questions. Let me start the discussion, though, by asking each of you a question. I'm going to ask Stephanie the fairly straightforward question about mobility. It struck me from the empirical data that those who went through mobile experiences in the sense of going abroad and so on seemed to make a difference. That seemed to energize or change the imagination in some way. That seemed to activate people in some way. I wonder if you had any further thoughts about the role of mobility in this kind of personal journey. And for She, I mean, I'm giving you a seminar in 2 days' time. So in this program about the global, what's the global? What's globalization? That's that kind of fundamental question. And you're coming from China, working in the Anglo-American context, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, there's more than one way to see the global, as far as I can see. I think you're working from partly from the sort of conventional Anglo-American idea of the global, because you talk about global English as a sort of necessary condition and so on. And that's probably open to argument. You could say that there should be more than one global language if we're going to have a more diverse global space. But my question is really about China and a kind of Chinese globalization. I mean, do you think China has a distinctive globalization to contribute as a culture, as a people, to the global? I mean, it's been in a European American globalization up to now, 30 years of the internet and accelerated world trade and economic convergence, and it's been very much an American, English, German kind of scene, hasn't it? Do you think that China can do it differently and maybe better? So I guess Stephanie first, because it's an easier question.
Thank you, Simon. So yeah, definitely in terms of mobility, I do think, as you've observed through my presentation, I think mobility can have an impact on how students' perceptions can change. But I think it might not just only be mobility by any chance, because some of the students actually did not actually go out of the country as well. But yeah. I think it's just their experiences, and definitely mobility or going out into having experience abroad somewhere in a new environment can have an impact or a life-changing experience for students. So I definitely do agree with you in terms of mobility.
I think having friends too. I mean, having cross-cultural friends makes it. That. I mean, when you ask people about international education, which I did some research on a few years ago, and ask faculty, academic staff about international education, those who've been abroad and those who have got lots of cross-cultural friends, both groups that see it differently to the mainstream who are just living and working in one culture all their lives. So yeah, it's friendship really does make a difference too. Now, the challenging question, is there a Chinese globalization? Is it different? Is there more than one globalization? Is there more than one global?
Yeah, I do think China definitely have a different perspective of globalization. In my research, every student mentioned the Chinese political policy called a destiny of human, destiny for a human are facing a destiny of shared future. I'm just trying to put it straight. There are different translations. So basically, the president Xi in his global summit, and he stated China want a globalization which is to for say everybody in this world we share the same future. So that everybody should live for the mature benefit. So I think China, so in this sense, it's more about harmony, globalization, and less emphasis on those competition or neoliberal view. I believe China's globalization is more on the respect side and the inclusiveness side. And my research emerged one of the biggest conflicts between China's view and globalization or Western is Chinese people tend to think Western people emphasize democracy too much, and because of the emphasis on democracy are trying to impose this democracy idea on China. So Western people think if China wants to participate in globalization, China has to increase their value of democracy and give more personal freedom in sense of like the individualism to Chinese society. But I don't say Chinese people commonly don't agree with that. They would not think that's necessary for China to join the globalization process to achieve democracy. I think that's one of the interesting conflicts about China's view and Western view.
Yes, I mean, it comes from this view that if there's going to be, economic globalization, then there has to be, a liberal democratic environment as well. That somehow the two are all tied together and so on. Well, what you're talking about, I think, is cultural globalization and diversity. I think it's impossible to imagine that the global world will have a single political system in the foreseeable future, that it will clearly be diverse in terms of roles of the government and the state, traditions in that regard, role of the nature of the family, the nature of the communities and intermediate institutions, the degree of autonomy of cities within nations, the approach taken to business. I mean, all those things are always going to be variant, I think, at a world level, at least for the foreseeable future. If we can agree on some basic things like saving the environment, though, it may not matter so much that we don't have the same political system if we can agree on the really big, issues that we have in common. I mean, in a few weeks' time, we're going to give a webinar on Tianxia, as an alternative way to think about the world, and giving that with two colleagues who are originally from China. One is in Hong Kong now, and the other one is at Oxford. And I mean, the thing about the Tianxia idea, I think, is it does provide a formula for harmony and diversity. It allows for the idea of cooperation at a world level, but a soft form of cooperation, which doesn't force everyone into a single political or cultural mold. It allows for significant diversity, but it places priority on, on good intercultural relations in that setting. And that is all very well. That's all going to work perhaps at a world level, providing no nation or nations seek to dominate too much. And that's probably the bottom line issue. I think a lot of people are concerned about China. They think China may be trying to get too big, as America has been too big, as up to now. So I think that, the problem in China is to try to become a larger world player without, frightening all the horses, so to speak. That's the challenge. Let me bring in Anne Means as our first Q&A participant. Anne, can you come in, please?
I can indeed. Here I am on screen. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much, Xi, for both presenters for fascinating presentations. I've enjoyed both of them very much. I have a question for Xi, and I'm not sure whether it's an innocent question or whether, in the light of the discussion we've just had about globalization, it may have more layers than I actually intended when I thought of it. I'm wondering, Xi, did your research give you any sense of what your participants were planning to do with their global citizenship when they graduate? For example, are they planning to return to China, work in China? Are they planning to work elsewhere? Are they planning to work in particular roles, national or international roles, big companies, academia, family companies, government? Did you have any sense of what they would plan to do with the skills that they would develop as global citizens?
Yes, as my research is longitudinal study, so during every interview, I ask the students their career plan. So in the first interview, 15 out of 19 students, they said they want to have a job in the UK, not permanently, but just to gain some experience, because they believe the international working experience will be highly valued in China. But during they are actively looking for a job in the UK, but because of the reality, at the second and the third interview, they realize it's not easy to have a job with a work visa in the UK. That was because my research was 2 years ago. There's no post-work visa policy, so the students, they started to look for jobs which are international companies, and also students who's learning education, they want to work in international schools. So they want to work for employees who's Western employees, or employees, or they are Chinese, but they have multiple companies in different countries, because they believe their English skill, also their understanding of Western culture could help. And also Chinese students, they found their global citizenship is happier than in terms of finding international work for international company, international schools, but it's not happening for work for government because it's not valued. And also students, some of the students during the third interview, they already already back to China. They said with their global citizenship, they tend to like making friends with the people who's back from other country. So they form a quite interesting group of Chinese overseas returners. And they like to live together, they like to be friends together, and they identify them as someone who's different than other Chinese as the same age.
Fascinating. Thank you very much. Very rich answer to my question. Thank you. Okay.
Yes, that's very interesting. Alison Leslie is our next participant in the Q&A. Alison. Hello, Alison.
Hi there. Hi. Yeah, I'm from University of Leeds, where I teach global citizenship to students here about to go on their study year abroad, undergraduate students. So I'm really, really interested in this. And thank you, Stephanie, for reminding me of the importance of writing up about what I'm doing, because I keep putting it off, so I must do it now. But my question is for Xi. I think you said that the students, although they valued learning about different sort of, skills, that they didn't feel able as much to take up opportunities to be proactive and participate in those, perhaps the kind of things that Stephanie was talking about. And I just wondered if they talked a little bit about why that was, and if there's anything that we as a university, particularly those of us who work closely with students, can do to enable that.
Oh, yes, I think during my research, some students, they said the university didn't provide them the contacts to develop the intercultural communication skills. Many Chinese students, especially who's learning education, or even the ones learning accounting and finance, they said most of their classmates are Chinese, and the rest of them not really engaging with them. So they didn't have any contacts to engage in the classroom. Also, many students, especially in my university and also in Reading, they said the university tended to put the Chinese students together to share the same room, or to share the same floor. Even there's academic accommodation building around the USA. The students said it's 90% people, they are Chinese. So under those contacts, the Chinese students, they don't have information about how to participate, what sort of activity done there. For example, some students, they want to go to join student society which is where I think many all the students, all the university have student society, which could provide the Chinese students a chance to communicate with people of different culture. But because those Chinese students, their own friends, they're all Chinese, and they are very reluctant or shy to do things which are different from within their group. So I think if Chinese students are forced into a context living with different people, and also in the class, maybe there could be some big class to mix, big lectures to mix Chinese students with other subjects or something. So they can make friends, so they can so they can be motivated to join student society. So I think the context is important. Also, the information to penetrate the Chinese group, which is a very closed group sometimes. So if you have a Chinese representative who can promote different activity to Chinese group, I think that might bridge the university's platform to Chinese students.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, we had an international.
I'm going to have to bring in some more questioners.
Oh, sorry.
We get into a dialogue, it tends to take the webinar over. Xiaojie Kai is our next question.
Hi, I have a question for Xi. So you briefly mentioned about the students' motivation of studying abroad, like for example, their family background and like their ideas about the career development things. So before that, it comes to impacting their global citizen awareness development, I think that actually has a level that will influence like what discipline they go into to begin with, like what course they're studying. Because like take for example, I work in a business school, like within the business school there are students who are studying accounting and finance and the business management, and I tend to find them like have fundamentally different idea of what exactly they are going to do with their education, and that actually massively has this big impact on whether they are willing to engage with anything that's outside of their classroom. Because developing the awareness of global citizenship sometimes is something that is not perceived as the education they're here for. So do you have any sort of like evidence or findings or linking like the discipline and whether they develop their awareness on becoming global citizen or not? That's my question.
Oh yes, I do, because I do, because my the group of the students participate in the interviews. Some of them study business, some of them study education, even international education. Some of them are from study engineer. So so it turns out that female students study education. They have very strong motivation to for intercultural communication, and also they plan to become teacher in the future, English teacher. So it seems like a more active ways in those things. But there's really there's many country argument is the one of the students who study business, he's the one who's really want to become global citizen, because he thought he want to live in the UK and to work for a big company like a Big Four consultancy, those company. So I think it's still I don't know if there's like a direct correlation between subject, but I can say no matter students they study business or education, there's always students who's really actively seek global citizenship, and some students they just not bothered. So I'm not sure the degree of correlation.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you both. Let me ask Stephanie a quick question before I bring in Ron Barnett and Doug Bourne. Stephanie, you're in Japan. Question of global citizenship taken very seriously in Japan as well. How is the approach to global citizenship in education different in Japan as to what it is in the UK? You've seen both.
I think in terms of I'm not sure so much in terms of each school can have their own way of providing global citizenship, but I don't think the term actually global citizenship is as popular as in the UK. So actually, I was gonna kind of share this in terms of when I asked them, what do you think, how do you define global citizen? And some of them actually don't know, have never heard of it before. So in terms of, I think the closest is that the government talks about fostering global leaders. So I think it's more of this context of what, she was talking about neoliberal in terms of more the skill sets and also competing in the global world is more of, I think, the focus and emphasis within schools in Japan more. So although they do, in terms of the cosmopolitan aspects as well, it might not be tied to the global leaders per se, but they do learn it in different kind of subjects as well in terms of, compassion or empathy or harmony and things like that.
Now, let me bring in two more contributors to Q&A. We usually run a little bit past the hour, till about 5 past, and people are leaving usually at that point. So Ron Barnett and Doug Bourne, I'll bring you both in and then give our speakers a chance to reply to each of you together, and that'll close the webinar. So Ron, you're first in that sequence.
Thank you, Simon. When I ask a question on these occasions, I like, if I can, to try and bring both speakers together and see if I can even get a dialogue going between you. So let me try this one on you both. Xi started very nicely, I thought, with a nice conceptualization of global citizen. We had 3 concepts: the neoliberal, the cosmopolitan, and the critical. Now, what I want to have a sense from you as to what your researchers say about that conceptualization. Let me offer you my take. Stephanie, I think you've shown that the students you've been looking at are cosmopolitans very nicely. So I'll park that there and you can respond. But I also want to say of Xi that the students you've been talking to, Xi, it seems to me, are somewhat neoliberal in their approach, but I think you're offering us a separate concept of global citizenship, not in the 3 you gave us originally. And I'd call the concept of global citizenship that I saw coming through your students, I'll invent a term right now, global nationalism. I have a sense that your students, I see Doug is laughing, smiling, but I have a sense that your students, and I sense this for what it's worth of Chinese postgraduate students around the world, is that they're very proud of China and they're wanting, understandably, to project China to the world. And I'll call that global nationalism. But there's also a hint or two of the neoliberal strain coming in. What I don't see, therefore, if this analysis is right, I haven't seen much sign so far in this discussion today of critical global citizenship. Comments?
Okay, I think Doug's got the chance now to rework all of that before our speakers respond.
I have some sympathy with what Ron's saying, and I think what I think is really interesting from both the research and obviously supervising both the students is the sense, and what it's posed is that there's a danger of almost taking a very Western interpretation of global citizenship and not looking at the complexities of things. And what I particularly wanted to ask them both is, from their research, do they think there are particular Asian perspectives, which could be different from both China and Japan, that reflect different interpretations of being a global citizen might be? And I'd like to pose that in the context of both this historical, but also the cultural and philosophical influences on both societies. So I'm aware there's a lot of discussion at the moment about in China about global citizenship, and not really quite sure on where it sees itself. And I think I think what I just wanted to pose to both of them is that to some extent I think their research is posing some of those questions rather than saying this is where they should be. I just wanted to see from their own experiences whether they think there's a need to bring in more Asian voices and perspectives into this research in this field.
Well, let me give you both the response, and we might, reverse the order and take Stephanie first, and then she will have the last word. Stephanie.
Yes, thank you very much for this comment. In terms of, I guess, in terms of the neoliberal cosmopolitan and culture, and seeing that my students or my interviewees were cosmopolitan, I do kind of agree in that a majority of them did have some cosmopolitan values, but also there was this one student who was that I introduced that talked about how he was participating in volunteer activities just to gain experience, more so in terms of having a better resume, because he didn't get into the best college or university. And so in that sense, I think also there are some elements of neoliberal as well, in terms of wanting to gain the skills to be competent in the global world as well. And in terms of the cultural context of Japan, in terms of the literature and policies and things like that, and the school environment as well, I think there is more emphasis, I think, on the national, and also in terms of connecting to the local community is a big part. So when I did ask students about, their cognitive ability in terms of their local, national, and global spheres, and also how much they connect or know about these spheres, a lot of students had more understanding about what was happening in the national level, and then also the local community, less about global issues. And that could also be, I think a lot of them said that it's the influence about media. So whatever they've learned through the media, and I think from my experience of watching Japanese media and things like that on television, there's a lot of news and headlines about the national, some about global, but more about national. So I think in that sense, it can, be in terms of that, maybe that's why more students are more linked to national issues. But yeah, so I think I'll end here for now so that she can also have some comments.
Okay, yeah, thank you. In regard to Reynolds' comment, I think it's quite interesting about the global nationalism. At the beginning of my research, that's a very interesting quote. I think it can be argument for this global nationalism. One of the students, he said he think Chinese students are real global citizens compared with Western people, because Chinese students are open to Western culture, willing to learn Western culture, and also keep Chinese culture. In contrast, Western people, they don't know anything. They do not open to Chinese culture. They only know theirs, but they are trying to compose this culture to everywhere in the world and call that globalization. So they also some students, just like Reynolds said, many Chinese students, they think one of the important experience of being global citizens, they do some volunteering to teach primary school students Chinese, organized by the local church. It could be interpreted as a cultural implantation. But another way is just like the Chinese students said, to be global citizen for Western people, they need to learn something about China, so that Chinese people know both culture and Western people know both culture. So I interpret this sort of thing not as nationalism, more about Chinese people hope Western people can have both knowledge, both value of Western and Eastern, just like Chinese, they have both Western and Eastern value. And another thing, Reynolds said, my research lack of the critical approach of global cities. I think maybe I didn't present in my presentation. One important part is during the pandemic, many Chinese students suffered from racism, which they would never conquer before if they study abroad at other time. So during that time, that is the time Chinese students start to know how important the social justice is. Those students, they get mistreatment because of the prevailing Western's view about like the virus. So those students, what they learned was some students they started to write letter to student union and to tell them not to call the virus Wuhan virus, because that was official writing in student union. And some Chinese students, they wrote on Facebook, they protest against people the discrimination to Chinese. So they think that is what their action in relation to global justice, because they are the victim, they are the victims facing global injustice. So I think that's a quite interesting area in my research. So the different sense of global justice for Chinese, I think that's one of the area. Thank you.
I mean, well done, Xi. I mean, for coming back so strongly and for making lots of points when it's not easy to do that when you've got a very erudite and capable person who's provided you with criticisms. You then responded very, very well. And thank you, Ron. I mean, I think putting those issues on the table was really good as well. And there's a real debate there, I think, underlying this, and a lot to be discussed. I'd like to see that discussion taken forward. It takes us a little bit away from the global citizenship issue, but only to a degree. But, it's very difficult to find a global or worldview which doesn't have nationalism there somewhere. And the nationalisms are different. The global projects that nations take into the world as a whole are variant, are to some extent conflicting with each other. We probably do need to find a global or worldview which is free of nationalism, but there'll always be national identity, and there'll always be local identity. There'll always be families. We'll always live in these different scales: global, national, local, regional, of different kinds, and individual and familiar. And we have to order a world in which all those things are possible, it seems to me. That's the task. These are really important conversations. Higher education is a place which can shape people's outlooks for the rest of their lives. And the approach we take to these big global issues and the big geopolitical issues now is going to influence the next generation. So it's a good discussion to have, and we'll keep having it. If you look at our webinar program coming up, you see these issues come up again and again and again. They're not easy to sort, but thank you all, including Ron and Doug, for those contributions. Look, really good to have you on the show, Stephanie and Xi. And, you're welcome to put forward ideas for webinars to us in future. Thank you, Doug, for organising these two very good webinars, very successful. And the issues of global citizenship will march on. No doubt we'll return to them. Next webinar is on Thursday, and we're back with the global and the national and the local again. And we couldn't find anyone else to talk about it except me. So I'm afraid you'll have to put up with me. I won't be chairing, hopefully, but I'll be presenting on, what is the global? Is the global a friend or a foe? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Or is it both of the above, or is it something different? Let's talk about that in 2 days' time. And let me say thank you all, and bye for now.